The siren wailed through the night, a chilling reminder of the strict curfew imposed on the underprivileged sector. Caleb crouched in the corner of his dimly lit room, staring out of a cracked window at the patrol drone circling above. He gripped a worn, makeshift tool in his hand, his knuckles white with tension. His younger sister, Amina, lay curled on a thin mattress behind him, coughing softly in her sleep. Their mother had left hours ago, working yet another shift in the hazardous factory across the district. Life in Sector 12 was brutal. The towering city skyline, visible only in glimpses through the pollution, belonged to the technocrats, those who controlled the technology, wealth, and opportunities. Here, people like Caleb were forgotten, struggling for survival amidst crumbling infrastructure and poisoned water. He couldn't remember the last time anyone in his sector felt hope. People survived, but they didn't live. Earlier that day, a broadcast had flickered to life on one of the few functioning communal screens. The charismatic voice of Elon Musk echoed through the dusty air. He announced a global contest, a series of puzzles designed to push the limits of human creativity and intelligence. The prize? A Tesla Cybertruck, the pinnacle of innovation and autonomy, a vehicle that could transform lives in ways most people in Caleb's sector couldn't even imagine. At first, the announcement was met with laughter. "Another stunt for the elites," someone had muttered, shaking their head. "How would anyone here even compete? No tools, no resources." The crowd had dispersed, uninterested, their cynicism justified by years of neglect and inequality. But Caleb couldn't shake the idea. The Cybertruck wasn't just a prize to him, it was a chance. A chance to escape the suffocating grip of the regime. A chance to save his sister, his family, and maybe even his entire community. He spent hours scouring through piles of discarded tech in the scrapyard, searching for anything he could use. He had always been good with machines, salvaging and repairing broken devices to earn a few credits here and there. His mind worked in ways others didn't understand, piecing together parts to create something functional out of nothing. It was a skill born out of necessity, but now it might be his only way out. When he found the microchip buried under layers of debris, his heart raced. It was damaged, but Caleb saw potential. He brought it back to their cramped room and worked under the flickering light of a single, failing bulb. His hands moved with precision, soldering and rewiring, his mind racing with calculations. Amina stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. He glanced at her pale face, her frail body weakened by the contaminated water they were forced to drink. He clenched his jaw and refocused. Failure wasn't an option. The first puzzle was released that night. It appeared on the communal screens, a complex sequence of algorithms and equations that required not just intelligence, but creativity. Caleb watched as the screen flickered, his heart pounding. The solution came to him like a spark, an instinct born from years of tinkering and adapting. Using his repaired microchip and a makeshift interface, he inputted his answer. It worked. For the first time in years, Caleb felt a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name. Was it hope? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The second puzzle would come soon, and he knew the challenges would only get harder. He also knew that people were watching. The contest wasn't anonymous. Every participant's progress was displayed on a global leaderboard. Caleb's name stood out, not just for his surprising success, but for what it represented. A boy from Sector 12, an underdog in a world designed to crush people like him, had made it through the first round. Word spread quickly in the sector. Some people cheered for him, their disbelief giving way to cautious encouragement. Others sneered, calling it a waste of time. "Even if you win, it won't change anything," an older man scoffed. Caleb didn't respond. He had no time for doubt, not when the stakes were so high. As the night deepened, Caleb continued working, his hands moving with relentless determination. He thought about his mother, about Amina, and about all the people in their sector who had given up on dreaming. He thought about the Cybertruck, not as a vehicle, but as a lifeline. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could win. The second puzzle was released at dawn, its complexity enough to dissuade even the most determined participants. The algorithms were layered with encryption techniques that required advanced tools and a level of access Caleb could only dream of. But he didn't let that stop him. Instead, he leaned into his strength, resourcefulness. With his repaired microchip and a few salvaged components, he began piecing together a rudimentary interface capable of cracking the code. The room was eerily silent except for the faint hum of his makeshift device. Amina, still asleep, stirred occasionally, her quiet breathing a reminder of why Caleb couldn't afford to fail. His fingers moved quickly, navigating through sequences and bypassing blocks that seemed insurmountable. Hours passed, the tension in his chest growing with each passing minute. Across the leaderboard, names from the elite sectors climbed steadily, their progress reflecting the resources and education they had at their disposal. Caleb's name, though a surprising contender, remained stagnant for hours, drawing ridicule from participants who openly dismissed him. "A kid from Sector 12? He's wasting a slot," one comment read on the public feed. Others were harsher, mocking his background, his lack of access, and even his worth. But Caleb wasn't paying attention. He'd long since learned to tune out the noise, focusing only on what he could control. His mind worked in overdrive, not just solving the puzzle, but reimagining the tools at his disposal to do so. He used outdated tech in ways it was never intended to function, crafting solutions born out of necessity. What he lacked in resources, he made up for with creativity. When he finally cracked the second puzzle, his hands trembled as he submitted the answer. The leaderboard updated instantly, and his name shot up the ranks, landing in the top 10. For a moment, the sector erupted in cheers. Those who had doubted him now watched with wide-eyed disbelief as Caleb proved himself against the odds. Even the skeptics found themselves rooting for him, their cynicism melting into cautious hope. But the victory was short-lived. The announcement for the third puzzle came almost immediately, its instructions more cryptic than the previous challenges. Caleb barely had time to celebrate before he was back at work, his mind already racing through potential strategies. This time, the puzzle required not just technical skill, but deep knowledge of theoretical physics, knowledge Caleb didn't have. The realization hit him like a brick wall. For the first time, he felt the weight of his disadvantage. The elites had access to schools, libraries, and mentors. They had everything he didn't. But as doubt began to creep in, a memory surfaced, his mother's words from years ago. "You don't need their tools to be great, Caleb. You just need to think differently." That was it. He didn't need to follow the rules of the puzzle. He needed to rewrite them. Instead of attempting to solve the equations directly, Caleb devised a method to simulate the outcome using his limited tools. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't guaranteed to work, but it was his only shot. The process was grueling. His makeshift interface overheated twice, forcing him to pause and rebuild components on the fly. The room grew stifling, the heat from his equipment mixing with the tension that filled the air. But Caleb pushed through, his determination unwavering. Failure wasn't an option, not when so much depended on him. As the hours dragged on, Caleb's progress caught the attention of the contest organizers. His unconventional methods were flagged for review, drawing scrutiny from the judges. But Elon Musk himself intervened, intrigued by Caleb's ingenuity. "Let the boy play," Musk reportedly said, his words sparking a wave of curiosity and admiration across the global audience. When Caleb submitted his solution to the third puzzle, the system hesitated, processing his answer longer than usual. The silence was deafening, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, the screen flashed green. Caleb had done it. The leaderboard updated once more, and Caleb's name climbed higher, solidifying his place among the top contenders. But this time, the response was different. The ridicule gave way to awe, the mockery replaced by respect. People began sharing his story, highlighting his resourcefulness and resilience. Caleb, the boy from Sector 12, had become a symbol of hope in a world that desperately needed it. But Caleb didn't have time to dwell on his newfound fame. The contest wasn't over, and the challenges would only get harder. He knew the elites would stop at nothing to protect their dominance, and the oppressive regime that controlled his sector wouldn't take kindly to his growing influence. The stakes were higher than ever, and Caleb was just getting started. The fourth puzzle was released at a time when Caleb's community was on the verge of collapse. The water supply, already scarce, had been contaminated further, leaving children sick and families desperate. Amina's condition worsened, her frail body weakened by dehydration and illness. Caleb could hear the murmurs outside his home, the hopelessness in his neighbors' voices growing louder with each passing day. The contest had become more than just a competition. It was now a lifeline, the only chance he had to change their reality. The fourth challenge was unlike anything before. It required building a device capable of decrypting a live data stream from a satellite, a task that would normally demand a laboratory full of advanced equipment. Caleb stared at the instructions, the weight of the impossible task pressing on his shoulders. He looked around his tiny room, his collection of scavenged tech parts a far cry from what was needed. But he didn't allow himself to sink into despair. He couldn't. Amina's life depended on him moving forward. As the hours stretched into the night, Caleb worked tirelessly, piecing together a device from discarded circuit boards, broken processors, and wires stripped from old machines. His hands were blistered, his eyes bloodshot, but his focus never wavered. Every time he hit a dead end, he found another way, his mind racing to stay ahead of the clock. The noise outside his home grew quieter, the community waiting anxiously for any sign of progress. The satellite connection was shaky at first, the signal flickering in and out as Caleb adjusted his device. He clenched his teeth, every adjustment feeling like a gamble. Finally, the stream stabilized, and the data began to flow. The encryption was intricate, designed to test even the most advanced minds. But Caleb's unconventional methods gave him an edge. He bypassed the expected solutions, creating a unique algorithm that unraveled the code layer by layer. As the final encryption broke, Caleb's device emitted a low hum, signaling his success. He submitted the results, his hands trembling with exhaustion and relief. The leaderboard updated, his name now in the top 3. The announcement sent ripples through the sector, whispers of hope spreading like wildfire. Caleb had done what no one thought possible. He was on the brink of winning, despite every obstacle in his path. But his success came at a cost. The oppressive regime had begun to take notice, their surveillance tightening around Sector 12. Caleb knew he was being watched. Drones hovered more frequently, their silent presence a reminder of the danger he was in. He had become a symbol not just of hope, but of defiance, and the regime didn't tolerate defiance. That night, as Caleb tried to rest, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside his home. He froze, his heart pounding as shadows moved past the window. He whispered to Amina to stay quiet, his body shielding hers instinctively. The footsteps paused before moving on, leaving him shaken but determined. He knew the regime was testing him, waiting for a misstep. He couldn't afford to give them one. The next day, Caleb stepped outside for the first time in days. The air was heavy with tension, but something had changed. People who once dismissed him now met his eyes with respect. A neighbor handed him a small bag of clean water, their own supply rationed to the brink. Another offered him scraps of metal they had found. It wasn't much, but it was everything they had. Caleb realized he wasn't just fighting for his family anymore. He was fighting for all of them. The final puzzle loomed on the horizon, its details still shrouded in mystery. Caleb knew it would test him in ways he couldn't imagine, but he was ready. His success had sparked something in his community, a flicker of hope in a world that had long forgotten what hope felt like. And no matter how impossible the odds, Caleb was determined to see it through. For Amina, for his neighbors, and for the future they all deserved. The announcement of Caleb's completion of the fourth puzzle spread like wildfire, reaching not only his sector, but also the technocrat-controlled hubs. For the first time, news anchors discussed a boy from the underprivileged zones as a serious contender, a stark contrast to the ridicule he had faced just days earlier. Elon Musk himself acknowledged Caleb during a global broadcast, calling him a brilliant mind from unexpected places. That simple statement sent shockwaves through society, forcing people to reconsider the long-held belief that innovation was reserved for the privileged. Hours later, the sound of a powerful engine echoed through Sector 12. Residents peered cautiously from their windows, unsure of what was happening. When the sleek, angular Cybertruck appeared, it was as if the future had landed in the middle of their crumbling reality. The vehicle's metallic sheen reflected the dull, polluted sky, a stark contrast to the worn-down buildings surrounding it. Elon Musk emerged from the truck, his presence commanding attention. Caleb stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Musk approached him, offering a handshake and a few words of encouragement that Caleb barely registered. The gesture wasn't just symbolic, it was monumental. For the first time in their lives, the people of Sector 12 felt seen. The Cybertruck was more than a prize, it was a marvel of technology. Equipped with advanced autonomous systems, renewable energy capabilities, and a payload capacity that could rival any heavy-duty vehicle, it was a tool designed to thrive in the harshest environments. As Caleb climbed into the driver's seat, the crowd watched in awe. The interface lit up, sleek and intuitive, responding seamlessly to Caleb's hesitant touch. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where possibility outweighed despair. The excitement, however, was short-lived. As Caleb familiarized himself with the truck, the regime's drones began circling overhead, their presence a reminder of the thin line between celebration and danger. The government saw the Cybertruck not as a reward, but as a threat, an emblem of rebellion in the hands of someone they had worked so hard to suppress. They issued a statement condemning the contest, and subtly implying that Caleb's possession of such advanced technology would be closely monitored. The community's initial euphoria turned to apprehension. Some whispered that the truck would bring trouble, that Caleb had unknowingly painted a target on their backs. Others argued that it was a sign of change, a beacon of hope in a landscape defined by oppression. Caleb listened but said nothing. He had no intention of giving up the one thing that could finally shift the balance of power. Over the next few days, Caleb used the truck to transport clean water from distant sources, bypassing the regime's checkpoints with its stealth capabilities. He delivered food and medicine to families who had long been neglected, using the truck storage compartments to smuggle supplies past watchful eyes. Each trip was a calculated risk, but Caleb couldn't ignore the needs of his people. The truck had given him more than mobility, it had given him purpose. Word of Caleb's actions spread beyond Sector 12, reaching other underprivileged zones. Stories of his bravery and resourcefulness began to inspire similar acts of defiance. People started to organize, sharing resources and information in ways that hadn't been possible before. The Cybertruck became a symbol of resistance, its sleek design and advanced features a stark reminder of what could be achieved when power was placed in the right hands. But the regime wasn't blind to Caleb's growing influence. Surveillance intensified, and propaganda campaigns painted him as a reckless teenager endangering the fragile order of society. The drones followed his every move, their ominous hum a constant reminder of the danger he faced. Caleb knew it was only a matter of time before the regime acted, but he refused to let fear dictate his choices. As the days turned into weeks, the Cybertruck became more than just a tool for survival. Caleb began using its communication systems to relay messages across sectors, connecting communities that had long been isolated. He shared everything he learned, from building water filtration systems to basic medical care, empowering others to take control of their lives. The regime's grip on the underprivileged zones began to loosen, their authority undermined by the very technology they sought to control. Despite the challenges, Caleb's resolve never wavered. The Cybertruck wasn't just a prize or a symbol. It was a lifeline, a testament to what was possible when innovation met determination. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream, not just for himself, but for his family, his community, and the generations to come. He knew the fight was far from over, but he also knew that change had already begun. The shift in Caleb's community was undeniable. The Cybertruck's arrival had sparked something that had been buried under years of oppression, a sense of possibility. People who once moved through their days with hollow resignation now approached Caleb with ideas, plans, and solutions. They didn't just see the truck as a machine. They saw it as a symbol of what they could achieve if they worked together. Caleb, however, carried the weight of his newfound responsibility heavily. The Cybertruck had made him a figure of hope, but it had also placed a target on his back. The regime's drones patrolled more aggressively, their mechanical whirring a constant reminder of the power watching from above. He knew they were waiting for an excuse, any justification to silence him and reclaim control over the narrative he was building. One night, Caleb sat in the truck, its quiet hum soothing against the backdrop of the darkened sector. He scrolled through messages coming in from other zones. People were reaching out to him now, sharing their struggles, their plans to replicate what he had started. Some asked for advice on evading regime checkpoints, while others simply offered thanks. He replied to as many as he could, his exhaustion outweighed by a growing sense of purpose. But the regime wasn't content to let him operate unchecked. A public statement was broadcast across all sectors, condemning Caleb's actions as reckless and dangerous. They painted him as a criminal, someone disrupting the fragile order necessary to maintain stability. The message was clear: Caleb was a problem, and problems needed to be dealt with. Despite the growing tension, Caleb didn't stop. Each day, he pushed the Cybertruck further, testing its limits and his own. He navigated treacherous terrain to deliver supplies, often under the cover of darkness. The truck's advanced systems proved invaluable, allowing him to outmaneuver patrols and evade detection. He became a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the regime's control, a constant thorn in their side. But the stakes were rising. Reports of arrests in neighboring sectors began to reach Caleb. The regime was cracking down on anyone suspected of supporting his efforts, using fear to stifle the growing resistance. Caleb wrestled with guilt, knowing his actions had put others at risk. But he also knew that stopping now would only validate the regime's tactics. If he backed down, the hope he had ignited would be extinguished. As the tension escalated, Caleb found an unlikely ally. A former technocrat, disillusioned by the regime's brutality, reached out to him. The man, identifying himself only as Carter, offered resources and information, things Caleb couldn't access on his own. At first, Caleb was wary, unsure if this was a trap. But Carter's knowledge of the regime's inner workings proved invaluable. With his guidance, Caleb began coordinating larger operations, delivering not just supplies, but tools and knowledge that could empower entire communities. The Cybertruck became more than a vehicle, it became a mobile command center. Caleb used its advanced communication systems to broadcast messages of hope and resistance, urging people to stand together against the forces that sought to keep them divided. His words spread quickly, amplified by those who had once doubted him but now saw him as a leader. The regime's narrative began to crack, their portrayal of Caleb as a threat undermined by the growing evidence of his impact. But Caleb's success came at a cost. The regime's actions grew more desperate, their patrols more aggressive. One night, as Caleb returned from a supply run, he was intercepted by a fleet of drones. Their lights pierced the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. Caleb's heart raced as he activated the Cybertruck's defensive systems, relying on its advanced technology to evade capture. The chase was harrowing, every turn a gamble, every second a test of his resolve. But the truck held its own, its resilience a testament to the innovation it represented. When Caleb finally reached safety, he knew the confrontation had only been a warning. The regime was sending a message. They were done watching from the sidelines. Caleb's actions had forced their hand, and they wouldn't stop until he was silenced. But even as the danger grew, so did Caleb's determination. The Cybertruck wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in what it represented. And he would fight to protect it, no matter the cost. As the days stretched into weeks, Caleb began to see the cracks forming in the regime's control. Communities were organizing, finding ways to resist and support each other. The fear that had once paralyzed them was beginning to dissipate, replaced by something stronger. Caleb knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he believed they had a chance. A chance to build something better, something that couldn't be taken away. The inevitable came sooner than Caleb anticipated. The regime, no longer content with monitoring, launched a full-scale operation against Sector 12. Armed patrols and drones descended on the area, targeting anyone suspected of supporting Caleb's efforts. Families were interrogated, homes were searched, and the fear Caleb had worked so hard to overcome began creeping back into the community. Caleb's neighbors begged him to leave, to escape before the regime captured him. But he couldn't bring himself to run. His sister, his mother, his community, they were all here, and leaving them behind wasn't an option. Instead, he turned to the only strategy he had left, to confront the regime directly. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Caleb received a coded message from Carter, the former technocrat who had been helping him. The message was simple. The regime had issued a warrant for his arrest, but Elon Musk himself had intervened. Carter revealed that Musk had demanded a meeting with the regime's leaders, using his influence to protect Caleb and demand accountability for the oppressive policies targeting the underprivileged. Caleb didn't trust easily, but this was his chance to face the people who had held his community in their grip for so long. He agreed to the meeting, knowing it was as much a risk as it was an opportunity. The regime agreed reluctantly, their hand forced by Musk's global reputation and influence. When Caleb arrived at the designated location, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. The regime's leaders sat across the room, their faces cold and unyielding. Musk was there too, his demeanor calm but resolute. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken hostility. The conversation began with the regime's predictable accusations. They painted Caleb as a reckless instigator, someone jeopardizing the fragile stability of the sectors. They dismissed his actions as naive and dangerous, claiming that their policies, however harsh, were necessary to maintain order. Caleb listened in silence, his fists clenched under the table. When it was finally his turn to speak, he didn't hold back. He described the reality of life in Sector 12, the poisoned water, the lack of resources, the daily struggle just to survive. He told them about the families torn apart by their policies, about the children who had no future because of decisions made in distant offices by people who had never set foot in the sectors they controlled. His voice didn't waver as he spoke of his sister, of how she had fallen sick because of their negligence. He told them about the people who had given everything to support his efforts, not out of rebellion, but because they had no other choice. His words cut through the room like a blade, exposing the cruelty and indifference that had defined the regime's rule. Musk, to his credit, didn't interrupt. He let Caleb speak, his expression unreadable as he listened. When Caleb finally finished, the room was silent. The regime's leaders shifted uncomfortably, their carefully constructed narrative crumbling under the weight of Caleb's truth. Musk then addressed the leaders directly, his voice steady but firm. He held them accountable for their failures, pointing out that their policies had not only oppressed millions, but had also stifled innovation and progress. He argued that Caleb's success in the contest was proof that talent and ingenuity existed in every corner of society, regardless of access or privilege. Musk demanded change, not just for Caleb, but for every underprivileged sector. The regime's leaders pushed back, but their arguments rang hollow. They couldn't deny the impact Caleb had made, or the growing support he had garnered from people across the sectors. Musk's influence, combined with the undeniable evidence of Caleb's actions, left them with little choice. In the end, the meeting didn't result in sweeping change. The regime wasn't about to relinquish its power overnight. But it was a start. Caleb left the room with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that his fight was far from over. Musk, for his part, promised continued support, offering resources and a platform for Caleb to amplify his message. Back in Sector 12, Caleb's return was met with cautious optimism. The community had endured the regime's crackdown, but their spirit remained unbroken. Caleb shared what had happened during the meeting, emphasizing that while it was just a small step, it was proof that their voices could no longer be ignored. As the days passed, Caleb began to see the beginnings of change. People in other sectors started organizing, using the resources and knowledge Caleb had shared to advocate for their rights. The Cybertruck, once a simple prize, had become a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change was possible. Caleb knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The regime wasn't defeated, and the systems that had perpetuated inequality wouldn't be dismantled overnight. But for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that they were moving in the right direction. And as he looked at his sister, her health slowly improving, he knew that everything he had fought for was worth it. The days following Caleb's confrontation with the regime marked the beginning of a fragile but undeniable shift. The community, once fractured by fear and despair, began to unite in ways Caleb had only dreamed of. People who had once avoided speaking out started finding their voices, sharing stories of resilience and resistance. The Cybertruck remained at the heart of it all, a constant reminder of what determination and ingenuity could achieve. Caleb's focus turned to organizing his community, helping them prepare for the challenges ahead. With Musk's support, he received access to tools and resources that had once seemed impossible to attain. The first project was a water filtration system, built using parts Caleb had scavenged and technology provided through Musk's connections. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked, providing clean water to families who had gone years without it. The impact was immediate, and the community's gratitude was overwhelming. As word spread about the filtration system, other sectors began reaching out, asking Caleb for guidance. He shared everything he had learned, encouraging others to adapt his methods to their own circumstances. The Cybertruck became a mobile workshop, its advanced systems allowing Caleb to connect with people in even the most isolated zones. Each trip carried the risk of encountering regime patrols, but Caleb refused to let fear dictate his actions. The regime, for its part, remained a looming threat. While they had been forced to acknowledge Caleb's growing influence, they weren't willing to relinquish their control entirely. Propaganda campaigns continued, painting Caleb as a figure of chaos, someone disrupting the order they claimed to maintain. But the narrative was losing its grip. Too many people had seen the truth, had felt the impact of Caleb's work in their own lives. The regime's lies no longer held the power they once did. One day, Caleb received an unexpected message. It was from a group of technocrats, scientists, engineers, and innovators who had grown disillusioned with the regime's greed and corruption. They offered their expertise, asking only that Caleb use their knowledge to help those who had been left behind. Caleb hesitated, unsure if he could trust them, but he also knew he couldn't achieve the change he envisioned alone. He agreed, and the collaboration became a turning point. With the technocrats' help, Caleb began implementing larger-scale projects. Solar panels were installed across Sector 12, providing reliable electricity for the first time in years. A makeshift school was established, offering basic education and technical training to children and adults alike. The changes weren't immediate, and progress was slow, but it was real. For the first time, people in Sector 12 began to see a future beyond mere survival. But Caleb's work wasn't just about rebuilding infrastructure. It was about rebuilding trust. Decades of oppression had left deep scars, and many people still struggled to believe that change was possible. Caleb spent hours listening to their concerns, addressing their doubts with empathy and patience. He didn't have all the answers, but his willingness to listen made all the difference. Slowly, the community began to heal, its members finding strength in one another. As the months passed, Caleb's influence extended far beyond Sector 12. Communities across the underprivileged zones began organizing, inspired by his story and his work. The Cybertruck, once a single prize in a contest, had become a symbol of unity and resistance. Its sleek, futuristic design was a stark contrast to the crumbling infrastructure it traversed, a reminder of what could be achieved when technology was used for good. Elon Musk, true to his word, continued to support Caleb's efforts. He visited Sector 12 periodically, not as a savior, but as a collaborator. Musk's presence helped draw global attention to the issues Caleb and his community were addressing, forcing the world to confront the inequality it had long ignored. His involvement wasn't without criticism. Many questioned his motives, accusing him of using Caleb's story to bolster his own image. But Caleb refused to let the noise distract him. He focused on the work, letting the results speak for themselves. By the end of the year, the changes in Sector 12 were undeniable. The streets, once littered with debris, were cleaner. The air, once thick with despair, was filled with the sounds of children laughing and adults working together. It wasn't a utopia. Challenges remained, and the regime still loomed large, but it was progress. And for Caleb, that was enough. On the anniversary of the contest's announcement, Musk held a global broadcast, inviting Caleb to speak. Caleb hesitated at first, unsure if his words could make a difference on such a large stage. But as he stood in front of the camera, he thought about his sister, his mother, and the countless people who had supported him along the way. He spoke with quiet confidence, sharing his story not as a hero, but as a testament to what was possible when people refused to give up. His words resonated far beyond what he could have imagined. Donations poured in, volunteers stepped forward, and governments were forced to acknowledge the systemic failures that had led to such inequality. Caleb's work had sparked a movement, one that couldn't be ignored. As the broadcast ended, Caleb returned to Sector 12, his heart heavy with the knowledge that there was still so much to do. But as he looked at the faces of his community, faces filled with hope, resilience, and determination, he knew they were ready to face whatever came next. Together, they were building something that couldn't be taken away. Together, they were shaping a future worth fighting for.